Good morning. We welcome those of you worshiping with us on YouTube. We've shared joys and concerns here in the sanctuary on a cold, snowy morning, and we invite you to do the same and to gather your supplies for communion. I would invite all of you to stand and join in singing, "I Love to Tell the Story."
Gospel of Luke that's going to take us all the way up to Easter Sunday. So we'll be looking at the early chapters of Luke in the next several weeks, and then during Lent as Jesus travels towards Jerusalem. We're in the end of chapter 2 today. Chapter 2 is the chapter that begins with the traditional Christmas story of the shepherds and the angels. Last year, you might remember, we looked a little bit at chapter 1, which tells the story of Mary and Elizabeth and Zechariah and John the Baptist and their relationship, and then includes in chapter 2 the dedication of Jesus at the temple as an infant. Well, we pick it up right here just before we encounter the adult Jesus starting next week. Each year, his parents went to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. When Jesus was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem according to their custom. After the festival was over, they were returning home, but the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents didn't know it. Supposing that he was among their band of travelers, they journeyed on for a full day while looking for him among their family and friends. When they didn't find Jesus, they returned to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple. He was sitting among the teachers, listening to them and putting questions to them. Everyone who heard him was amazed by his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were shocked. His mother said, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Listen, your father and I have been worried. We've been looking for you." Jesus replied, "Why were you looking for me? Didn't you know that it was necessary for me to be in my Father's house?" But they didn't understand what he said to them. Jesus went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. His mother cherished every word in her heart. Jesus matured in wisdom and years and in favor with God and with people. In my home church, Methodist Church in Independence, Missouri, as a boy growing up, I was friends with children from a very large family. I honestly lost count at some point. I'm sure that there were 8 or 9 biological children, and when I had a conversation with the father involved, some years later, he was a roofer, and he actually came over and did some roof on our first home, informed me that after they had stopped having their old children, they began adopting. And so I think he mentioned that they had enough for a team. I don't recall whether that was a football team or a soccer team or something larger. But he was a very hard worker, was out running his business, and the mother and actually her mother lived with them, the mother-in-law, and those two took care of this large family. So I think when I was around them, there were 8 or 9. The oldest was a year younger than I. So when I was late in high school, I think every couple of years there was a child, and actually they were very talented and would appear at local talent shows and things. It was kind of, you put like the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family together. They would sing and dance, and they were good kids. The oldest especially was a good friend. Didn't know that the younger ones as much. The one that everyone kind of knew was Johnny, and Johnny was one of the younger boys, and Johnny had a whole lot of energy. He was one of those kids that the Sunday school teachers, at the beginning of the year would check their rolls to see which class he was going to attend that year. So my family was the family at that church that was always the last ones to leave. I know Melody's not here today. It snowed, but I know that she finds that's something about me that she doesn't always care for, is I still have that habit of, I should just be the last one out the door at church. I sang in the choir. I directed the youth choir when I was in college. My sister sang in the choir. She directed the children's choir. I played the piano for her choir. She played the piano for my choir. My mother and my sister played in the bell choir. I think my oldest sister sang in the bell choir too. There were clarinets and trumpets and flutes and all, there was always something going on with the Kellys. Plus, they were our friends. The friends I had of my own age, I didn't go to school with any of them. So Sunday, church stuff was when I got to see those friends, some of whom are still very, very, very close with. So about the time the Kellys would be leaving to go out for lunch, because that was our thing, that was the day that my dad would lose the argument with my mother, and we would actually go out to eat. So there wasn't a rush to go home and fix the pot roast or something. On more than one occasion, as we reached the back door of the church, we would find Johnny standing by the door. And knowing that we were typically the last ones to leave, and we would glance out in the parking lot and not see the bright red station wagon,
that Johnny's family drove, we would say, "Johnny, is everything okay?" And he would say, "Yeah, yeah." "Did your family leave without you?" "Yeah, yeah." Long before cell phones or any other way to contact them. "Well, should we take you home? Do we need to?" "We'll tell you what, we'll just wait. They'll be back." And so we would wait at the back door with Johnny before leaving this small child abandoned at the church. And sure enough, that red station wagon would come flying into the parking lot. They'd gotten part way home, maybe all the way, I don't know. I think usually part way because the thing was filled with children. And you remember in the 70s, we didn't have the best suspensions. And that station wagon would come flying in, kind of wobbling back and forth, and they'd screech to a stop, and a door would open, and Johnny would go running out and dive in the car, and they'd smile and wave at us, "Thanks for waiting," and we'd say, "All right, no problem." And off Johnny would go home. My own family would not have been quite that, wouldn't have handled it quite the same way, I don't think. In high school, 9 times out of 10 when I had getting to school or home from school or after school activities, I got a ride from a friend. I had a good friend that was a year older than I, that had a car, and my house was on the way to his house. Plus, we were really good friends. So, Bill, can I get a ride with Bill? Sure. Even back and forth to school. So my senior year, then I had to start riding the bus again. It was terrible. It was like demotion. The first day I got on the bus, and they were like, "Well, look who's back on the bus." And other friends, I almost always had a friend that could give me a ride home, but this one particular day I was staying for something at school, after school rehearsal. I think it was a small show I was working in where there just weren't very many of us in the cast, and Mom was going to come pick me up after school. I think she was still teaching elementary school music, I think, and I didn't have my own car, so I just remember getting done and walking through like a completely abandoned high school. I mean, there was nobody there. It was kind of winterish, not real cold, but I remember it being dark and gloomy, and it was that time when by the time I got into the rehearsal, that it was getting dark outside. And I made my way to the front door of the school, and I looked out, and nothing. Like, no other students, no faculty, no administration, nobody, and no Mom. And so I thought, well, again, no cell phones, no way, not even could get in the office and call home, none of that. So I thought, well, my mom is a very reliable person. It's not that she forgot. I know she'll be here. Something must have come up. But I was afraid to go outside because I thought if I went outside, the door would lock behind me and I'd be stuck out there, and it was cold. It was one of those cold days. So I just hung out inside the door of the school waiting for Mom. And waiting for Mom. And waiting for Mom. And Mom was outside waiting for me. And waiting for me. And when she had come up, pulled into the Circle Drive, I wasn't there. Whether she was early or I was late, I don't know. We didn't miss each other by much. Could have been the buses had to, the late buses might have. Anyway, she pulled off to the side into a parking spot that she had never used in all the years she had gone to Van Horn High School to pick up a kid. She had never once parked in that parking lot, which was out of sight of the door where I was standing. And I wish I could remember exactly who finally broke down. I think I finally went outside, held the door open, looked around, saw the blue Ford Torino. I was like, oh no, I'm in trouble. Because I just remember the conversation, the one-sided conversation on the way home, once I got to the car. And apparently this was all my fault that this has happened. Well, my mom was a super, super wonderful human being, but she had a little temper. And why was I just in there waiting when she was out here waiting for me, and why didn't I come looking for her? And I kept saying, well, I couldn't say, I learned to just be quiet. I did not say, did you not know that I was about the business of the musical theater at Van Horn High School? That would not have worked. One of the scholars I read this week studying this text, which I don't believe I have ever preached. It only comes up once every 3 years, in the lectionary cycle on the Sunday after Christmas. And that doesn't seem to make sense. Why would you go from, like this year it would have been Christmas Day, next day Jesus says 12. Wow, we missed some stuff in there. So, which we'll talk about in a second. There's not a lot in the Bible. But one of the scholars pointed out that Luke apparently never had teenagers. I mean, the writer, if you've been a teenager, which we all have, or if you've raised a teenager, then, just realize I realized as I read through it out loud today, that there is some frustration there. But they're like, how did they get days away, right? How did they leave? But it's this image of the community of friends and family from Nazareth traveling to Jerusalem. Surely he's with our cousins, or he's running around. That tells us of an extended family relationship there, right? They were not worried. They were heading north back to Nazareth. Surely Jesus is around somewhere. We'll find him. As soon as they realize he's not with them, it says they spend a day looking amongst their fellow travelers, looking for him, and then now there's a day, right? So by the time they finally realize he's not with them, they get back to Jerusalem. It's been 3 days. There is some, of course, foreshadowing there of Jesus being missing for 3 days and then being found again. But and they find him in the temple, having a conversation with the teachers. Either in the temple grounds, or those of us that have visited Jerusalem, the southern wall of the Temple Mount has the teaching steps, which are these long, tall marble steps where the teachers, the rabbis, would sit. And they would always teach from a sitting position. It's really easy to imagine them sitting on a step and their students gathered below, sitting on the steps below them in little groups, having a conversation. And they're astounded by Jesus' response, but his answers and his questions. He's not teaching, right? He's not teaching the adults, but he's having a conversation with them, wisdom far beyond his years. So Luke points out very specifically that he is 12. In past times when I have taught this lesson or talked about it, I've always said, they were going for his bar mitzvah. Well, actually that's wrong. In the ancient world, that ceremony that's very important now in modern day Judaism, and has been for a while, probably didn't even happen, like that real formal announcement. And plus it doesn't happen until you're 13. So when you're 13, Old Testament law says you become an adult male. And in our culture and in more modern days, the bar mitzvah signifies that. And in those days, at the age of 13, he would have been required, if possible, to travel to Jerusalem for one of these festivals. There are 3 pilgrimage festivals. One of them is Passover. And any adult Jewish male, if they're physically able to, financially available, are supposed to travel to Jerusalem. So the following year, he would have been obligated to be there, but at age 12, no. So either he chose to go, his family chose to go, it was, didn't have to be there, chose to be. He's teaching, conversing with the teachers, showing his wisdom. But the very, very last verse in this text is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. The translation I read today said, Jesus matured in wisdom and years, and in favor with God and with people. The Greek reads something like this: Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. And I love that image because it says that Jesus, at the age of 12, even though we know what we know about him, was not fully formed. He did not pop out of the womb as the Messiah that we would know later. He grew as any normal human being would. He grew in these 4 areas, which I find very important, because to me they mirror the great commandments that says to love God with your heart, your head, your body, and your spirit. There are these 4 areas. You shall love the God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength and all your mind. Jesus increased in wisdom, stature, his physical body, favor with God, his spiritual life, and with people, his social life. So Jesus was not, Jesus did grow up in at least somewhat of a more normal childhood than we might think, at least according to these stories by Luke. There's another gospel called the Gospel of Thomas, which was not included in the Bible by the church fathers, which tells some kind of weird stories about Jesus doing kind of magic tricks as a child. And so we think that those may have been from the imagination of the early church a little later on. But there's also, this was a struggle with people early in the Christian movement. What was Jesus like as a child? This is the only story we have. We have birth, we have dedication to the temple, nothing for 30 years except for this one account in Luke. And early on, there were many people in the Christian movement that decided that Jesus did indeed come like fully formed, like he was the Messiah, the Son of God, in his completeness early on as a baby. And so this is reflected in some art from the ancient world. So you might be familiar with icons. This is a style of art that is especially known in the Greek world, the Orthodox Eastern Church, and still in the Catholic Church as well. It's a very stylized way of painting, or I think it's paint, I don't know. But it tends to be kind of two-dimensional. It tends to be very symbolic. There's often words. You often see Jesus pictured in this kind of style of artwork. This is from the Church of the Nativity. This is the icon that sits directly above the place on the ground where tradition says that Jesus was born, like in the grotto, in the cave. It's a beautiful piece of art. So there we have Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus. Well, other artists decided that because Jesus was already more than Jesus, like little Jesus was like all there, right? So this is how Jesus is often depicted in icons of Mary and Jesus. So here we go. Jesus, the baby, as an old man, right? So here's one. See, notice the receding, thanks Adam. Notice the receding hairline. Here's picture 2, after he gets back to that. Oh, go back. There he is again. That's not like little Jesus that doesn't have any hair yet. That's like little Jesus that is bald, right? And then this continues. I'm laughing, but this continues to this day. Here is I forget where this is from, but here is a modern day sculpture of baby Jesus that looks a whole lot like Phil Collins. So, and it's huge. You see this guy? This little man right here. So that's some giant sculpture that someone's done. So there is a contrasting belief. The belief that Jesus came, was born, and was fully, had all of the aspects of an adult human that he would have. And I just choose not to follow along with that. And that one verse in Luke, the end of that passage is the one that really resonates with me. Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. I love that image. And it gives me a model. It gives me a model. If Jesus increased throughout his life in his wisdom, in his physical stature, in his spiritual life, his favor with God, and his social life, his relations with people, that gives me a template to look at and kind of look at myself. The very first sermon I preached when I arrived here in July of 2017 used this Great Commandment text, and I told you stories about the American Youth Foundation. American Youth Foundation is an organization that I was fortunate enough to attend summer camp the first 2 years of college, a national leadership conference that UMKC introduced us to, a beautiful camp facility called Camp Minnewanka on the shores of Lake Michigan, run by AYF, the American Youth Foundation. They run camps there all summer. They have several camps for all ages down through elementary school. And the American Youth Foundation was founded by the patriarch of the Danforth family out of St. Louis, and who were active in politics. and business, and he wrote a book in the 1920s where he laid out what he called his fourfold path of being a successful person. So here is the American Youth Foundation logo that shows Danforth's 4 areas to focus on. So if the logo looks familiar, you should know that the Danforth family owns Ralston Purina. Right? Make it red and white checkerboard, and that's Ralston Purina. The blue and white checkerboard is the American Youth Foundation, with the 4 letters in the middle that stand for our social, our mental, our physical, and religious aspects of our life. And they run the camp based on the idea that all 4 of those things need to be balanced. So in a day at camp, which is very long and full of activities, you begin with a morning calisthenics, there's an afternoon sports, several hours to play sports and get on the beach and do active stuff. It's for your physical life. In morning and afternoon, there are classes that are taught, pretty intense topics. They bring in scholars and teach classes. You're there for 2 weeks, really challenge your mind and your thinking. Obviously, there's lots of time for social interaction with the other kids that are there from camp. And then there's a morning meditation time, evening vespers. It's a very balanced way of these 4 areas, and it's amazing and wonderful experience, and also a really good model of how do I structure my day? How do I structure my life? Am I really trying to keep my mental, physical, religious, and social aspects of my life balanced? Are they all healthy? So that was, 40 years ago, and that still rings true to me. I think I shared before that if you look at the Boy Scout oath or Girl Scouts or camp, if you look at different organizations, you'll find these kind of focuses in different areas as being important. So living a balanced life, attempting to increase in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man, trying to balance my mental, physical, religious, and social life. It's all relative to where you are in your situation, right? I went and watched Blaine wrestle the other night. I went to a wrestling match at Winnetonka. The only second time in my life I've ever been to a wrestling match. It was fun, it's entertaining. He's phenomenal. Blaine pinned somebody in like 45 seconds or something. But as I watched, I thought, in the first 30 seconds of each of these wrestling matches, male and female, something occurs that would put me in the hospital, right? They look so natural, and so, one of them, picks someone up, and I was like, Ladina, is that legal for them to just like slam the other person? Yeah, they're fine. They're in that headgear, and that's a mat and stuff, and these pretzel things, and I'm like, I feel pretty good about where I am physically. I'm pretty physically, I'm happy with where I am at 57, but like, oh good Lord, I would just like, something would snap in half, right? And they'd call the paramedics, and I'm like, so is my working on my physical the same as a 17-year-old wrestler? Well, no, of course not. So where am I? Where can I care for my physical life? Where can I care for my mental, my thinking, my social, and my religious life? Because I really believe that when you are out of balance, it affects the other things. Like if one thing is out of whack, it's not just, my emotional life is terrible. Everything else is fine, right? Right? Yes, it doesn't work like that, I don't think. When I wrote a paper in seminary that studied treatments for clinical depression. So these are people that have depression, a consistent level of depression that's been analyzed by doctors, so that it's not just, I don't feel very good. It's something that's a very serious situation they're dealing with. And they found that physical exercise is as effective on short term as meds and as talk therapy. Now they all work. Having a therapy session with a therapist works, it helps. Taking medication for clinical depression helps, it works. Doing physical exercise helps, it works. Together, it does a lot of good. But they found that over the long term, the most effective one was being physically active. because it's something that once you start, you tend to do more, and people take the meds and they feel fine and they stop taking them, right? There are all kinds of things, but they found that over the long term, the physical exercise helped more with emotional health. I find that I have a deep connection between my body and my feelings and relationships. And that's just me, so I'm not trying to universalize, but if I am upset about something, I don't feel well. I mean, it affects my body, particularly my digestive system. No, I won't get into details about that. But if I'm mad, if I'm upset, if I'm hurt about something, I'll get queasy. I mean, I have physical manifestations of that. And then I will isolate. So having my feelings hurt or something wrong, then I will fix my body. If I don't feel well, if I'm sick, then I don't want to be around you. And my feelings, those three things really kind of seem to have come kind of some symbiosis among them. And I'm not sure where the head figures into all that. I don't know. It's kind of just keeping track of, hey, you don't feel very good. But in karate, we talk about how balance is very important. Being able to balance on one foot or the other. And we always say that where the balance problems are? They're all above your waist. Some of them are above your neck, but most of them are above. So you assume that having poor balance would be a strength or some kind of condition with your legs, and it could be, of course, if you're injured or something, not working right. But what we say to each other all the time is balance is about the upper body. If I'm to be balanced, physically balanced, we have a whole list of things that we check. Are my eyes focused in a certain place? Am I breathing? Crazy. Try to stand on one foot and hold your breath. Your body doesn't like that. Are my hands moving? Am I moving around? Is my mind cluttered? Am I just not able to do the physical things because I had a stressful drive, right? So all of those things affect one another. So the question following Jesus' model is, am I caring for mind, body, heart, and spirit? And I would argue today that you're not being selfish by focusing on that. It's very important. I believe that God wishes for all of us health in all areas. But remember, when you're on the plane and the oxygen masks drop, put yours on before you can help somebody else. So me being healthy physically, mentally, socially, and in my religious life, it affects you. In just direct one-on-one interactions, if I'm having a bad day, chances are you're having a bad day, right? If we hang out, if I'm not healthy. And then what happens when something bad happens, which is going to happen to all of us, if something happens to somebody I love and I'm not capable of being there for them because of my own stuff, and I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, I'm saying what we do affects each other. So focusing on my own personal health, living a balanced life, is very important. And not just for me, and not just for people that I come in contact with directly, but I believe that it affects all of us. I believe that we are deeply connected in ways we do not understand. My health, my well-being in body, mind, spirit, and heart affects the greater good, and so does yours. If I am connected with God, and you are connected with God, then we are connected to one another. Multiply that by 7.9 billion. That's the number of human beings on the planet right now. If we are truly connected through this spiritual life in ways that we do not understand, and I know that's the relationship I talked about the least. How are you connecting with God? That is a very important part of this. So if we're connected with 7.9 million people, I also believe that we're connected with the rocks and the trees and the cats and the dogs and the elephants and the emus and the monkeys and the minor birds. We are all somehow related together with one another, and the way that we live our lives affects ourselves, affects our loved ones, affects all of creation. God invites us, challenges us as followers of Jesus to increase in wisdom and in stature and in favor of God and man. I invite you into a moment of silent prayer, and I will follow that with a prayer written by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose birthday we celebrate this weekend. I invite you into a moment of silence. O thou eternal God, out of whose absolute power and infinite intelligence the whole universe has come into being, we humbly confess that we have not loved thee with our hearts, souls, and minds, and we have not loved our neighbors as Christ loved us. We have all too often lived by our own selfish impulses rather than by the life of sacrificial love as revealed by Christ. We often give in order to receive. We love our friends and hate our enemies. We go the first mile but dare not travel the second, but we forgive but dare not forget. And so as we look within ourselves, we are confronted with the appalling fact that the history of our lives is the history of an eternal revolt against thee. But thou, O God, have mercy upon us. Forgive us for what we could have been but failed to be. Give us the intelligence to know thy will. Give us the courage to do thy will. Give us the devotion to love thy will. In the name and the spirit of Jesus, we pray. We pray the prayer that he taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Just a couple of announcements. We remind any of you who are committed to be sponsors for our Hillcrest department. Again, that's a pledge of $240 over the year or $20 a month. I'm sure there are spots, I haven't checked for sure, but I'm sure there are spots available to help out with that important ministry. We do have a resident. We've been focusing on the young adult program at Hillcrest, which is fairly new, a few years old, and we have a resident right now in our apartment. And we're able to get her Christmas presents. Laura helped out with that, and Jean did a really great job. There's a thank you card somewhere floating around tomorrow. If you've got some new or used blankets, coats, warm weather clothing, I saw a thing I meant to update on their shoes, men's tennis shoes and hiking boots. If you got anything, any of that kind of stuff that you'd like to go down to Micah Ministry, I will get it down there. They've still continue to serve outdoors, so they have a limited number of volunteers they need, but they serve meals to their community there and still do some clothing and help out with them, especially during the winter, so in the northeast area of Kansas City. Our communion hymn today is We Remember You.
Our
eating, Jesus took bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take and eat, this is my body." He took a cup, gave thanks, and gave it to them, saying, "Drink from this, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many so that their sins may be forgiven." Our final hymn is "Thou Art Worthy." Let's stand and sing together. Attempt to get the word "hast" into a sentence before the end of the day. With a conversation with somebody, don't tell them why. Just say, "Has the Chiefs scored yet?" Hast. We've got a new benediction song. I'll sing through it once with Janet, and then I'll invite you to join me. It's on 233 in the hymnal, if that will help you with some notes and stuff. So we'll do it once, and then we'll do it all together. May the grace of Christ our Savior